There is a document sitting in a filing cabinet in Tucson, Arizona, right now. It is faded at the edges, the kind of paper that has been handled too many times by too many hands that should not have touched it. And on that document, there is a signature. My mother's signature. Except my mother did not sign it. She was 73 years old when that signature appeared. She had a slight tremor in her right hand from a stroke she had in 2019. She had not driven a car since 2021. She needed help reading the mail. And somehow, according to a notarized trust amendment filed with the Pima County Superior Court, she had visited an attorney's office on a Tuesday afternoon in March, reviewed a 41-page legal document, and voluntarily revised the entire distribution structure of her estate. Voluntarily. That is the word they used. I remember standing in my kitchen in Phoenix the day I found out. I was still in my work clothes. My feet hurt. There was a half-empty pot of coffee on the counter that had gone cold 2 hours earlier, and the refrigerator was making that low mechanical hum it always makes when the kitchen gets too quiet. I just stood there, reading the same paragraph over and over, because my brain kept rejecting what my eyes were telling it. My sister Linda and my brother Craig had been named as sole primary beneficiaries of my mother's trust. I had been moved to a contingent distribution, which, in plain language, means I would receive exactly nothing unless both of them predeceased her. I had not been told. I had not been consulted. And my mother, when I finally drove to her house and sat across from her at her kitchen table, looked at me with those soft, confused eyes and said, "Sweetheart, I do not know what you are talking about." And that is where this story actually begins. Not with a courtroom, not with a confrontation. It begins with a 73-year-old woman who genuinely did not know that her own children had signed her name to a document that would have stolen everything she had ever worked for and handed it to the two people she trusted most. My mother's name is Gloria Renee Whitfield, and I want you to understand who she is before I tell you what was done to her, because none of what comes later makes sense unless you understand the kind of woman she is. Gloria Whitfield was born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1951. She was the second of 5 children. Her father worked the night shift at a machine parts factory. Her mother cleaned houses in Germantown, the kind of neighborhood where people had swimming pools and she was expected to use the back door. My mother did not grow up with money. She grew up watching money leave. She watched her parents scrape and save and sacrifice, and she made a decision early in her life, a very deliberate, very quiet decision that she was going to do things differently. She got a nursing degree from the University of Memphis in 1973. She worked 31 years at Banner University Medical Center in Tucson. She bought her house in the Rincon Heights neighborhood in 1989, a 3-bedroom ranch house with a mesquite tree in the backyard and a kitchen window that looked out over the Santa Catalina Mountains. She paid it off in 2004. She planted tomatoes every spring and canned them every fall. She kept every birthday card anyone ever sent her in a shoebox under her bed. That house. That was the thing. That house was not just property. It was the proof. The proof that a woman born into scraping and surviving had built something solid and real and entirely her own. She had 3 children. Linda is the oldest. Craig is the middle. I am the youngest. My name is Renee, named after my mother's middle name. We grew up in that house. We fought in that kitchen. We cried on that porch. We left and came back and left again, the way kids do. By the time this story begins, March of 2023, Linda was 51 and lived 20 minutes away in Oro Valley. Craig was 48 and had moved back to Tucson from Las Vegas 3 years earlier, after his second marriage ended. He was staying in the mother-in-law suite my mother had built onto the back of the house in 2015. The one she had built because she believed in keeping family close. I was 44. I lived in Phoenix. I visited when I could, usually once a month, sometimes more. I called my mother 3 or 4 times a week. I was the one who managed her medical appointments when she got too confused to remember them herself. I was the one who sat with her through the cardiology follow-ups after her stroke. I was the one who organized her medications into those little weekly pill containers every time I visited, because she would forget otherwise. I am not telling you this to make myself sound like a saint. I am telling you this because it matters. Because the version of events that Linda and Craig presented to the court painted me as an absent, self-interested daughter who had done nothing for her mother and deserved nothing from her estate. And I need you to understand, before we go any further, that version was a lie constructed so carefully and so deliberately that it took me 4 months to fully dismantle it. If you have ever been the person in your family who did the invisible work, the appointments, the phone calls, the quiet showing up, and then watched someone else take credit for it, you already know this feeling. And if this story is hitting close to home, you might want to stay with me, because it gets a lot more complicated before it gets any cleaner. My mother established her revocable living trust in 2017. Her estate attorney at the time was a woman named Patricia Gould, a partner at a small practice in downtown Tucson that specialized in elder law. My mother had been referred to her by a friend at church, and by all accounts, the two of them had a warm, professional relationship. The original trust was straightforward. The Rincon Heights house, valued at approximately $340,000 at the time, along with my mother's savings and retirement accounts, would be distributed equally among her 3 children upon her passing. 1/3 each. Linda, Craig, Renee. 3 equal shares. Nothing dramatic, nothing complicated, just a woman making sure her children were taken care of. My mother had reviewed it carefully. She had asked questions. Patricia Gould had answered them. My mother had signed it in Patricia's office, in front of witnesses, with a notary present. Everything was done correctly. Everything was documented. I knew the trust existed. We had all talked about it, one of those mildly uncomfortable dinner table conversations families have when they realize their parents are aging and no one wants to say it out loud. My mother was practical about it. She did not make it morbid. She just said, "I want everything to be clear, so nobody fights when I am gone." She would not have imagined, in that kitchen conversation, that the fighting would start while she was still alive, that the document she had signed to prevent chaos would be quietly, surgically replaced with a different document, one she had never seen, one she had never signed. I want to tell you about the 6 months before I found out, because looking back now, the signs were there. They were quiet, and they were gradual, and I missed them, not because I was stupid, but because when you love people, you find explanations for things that should not need explaining. It started in October of 2022. Craig called me, which was unusual. Craig and I were not close. We were civil, the way siblings can be civil when they were never really friends, but he did not typically call me without a reason. He said he wanted to talk about Mom. He said she had been seeming more confused lately, more forgetful. He was worried. I was worried too. I had noticed it. The missed medication doses. The repeated questions. The way she sometimes lost the thread of a conversation mid-sentence. We talked for almost an hour. It was one of the longest conversations Craig and I had ever had. He seemed genuinely concerned. He talked about maybe getting her evaluated. He talked about how hard it was, living there with her, watching her decline. I remember thinking, Craig is stepping up. I was relieved. I was grateful. I told him I appreciated him being there. I said I would try to visit more. I am going to say that again. I was grateful. Because that is how it works, right? Someone presents you with a version of events, a caring, worried son watching over his aging mother, and you accept it. Because why would you not? Because you want to believe the people in your family are who they present themselves to be. In November, Linda called. She was more direct than Craig. She said Mom needed a healthcare proxy and a financial power of attorney updated. She said the documents from 2017 were outdated and that she and Craig had found an attorney who could help. She asked if I would be available to come to Tucson the following weekend to sign everything together. I could not make it that weekend. I had a work obligation I could not move. I told her to schedule it for the following month, and I would be there. She said okay. She sounded slightly irritated, but not alarmed. The following month came and went. No one scheduled anything. I followed up with Linda in December. She said the attorney had been busy over the holidays and they were going to handle it in the new year. Perfectly reasonable. Completely unremarkable. I filed it away and focused on Christmas. My mother spent Christmas at Linda's house that year. I drove down and spent 2 days with them. It was fine, surface level, careful, the way holiday gatherings are when families are managing unspoken things. My mother seemed happy. She was a little slower than she had been the year before, a little quieter, but she laughed at Craig's bad jokes, and she held my hand when we said grace before dinner. The last thing she said to me when I hugged her goodbye in Linda's driveway was, "You are my heart, Renee. Do not forget that." I did not forget it. But I also did not understand yet why she had said it that way. With that particular weight. That particular goodbye. By February, Craig had stopped returning my calls as promptly. Linda's texts had become shorter, functional. "Mom is fine. She had a good week. Doctor appointment went well. Nothing wrong with any of that. Nothing alarming. Just thin." I told myself they were busy. I told myself Craig was exhausted from the caregiving. I told myself that family communication just naturally compresses when everyone is stressed. I was choosing to be blind. I know that now. But here is what I also know. The blindness was not stupidity. It was love. It was the residual belief that the people who slept under the same roof as you for 18 years, who share your blood and your memories and the face of your mother, that those people do not do certain things. I was wrong. March 14th, 2023. A Tuesday. I was at my desk in Phoenix when I got an email from a woman I did not recognize. Her name was Sandra Okafor. She worked at a title company in Tucson. The subject line read, "Follow-up, Whitfield property, transfer question." I almost deleted it. I get a lot of junk mail. Something made me open it. Sandra was reaching out because she had been tasked with verifying certain documents related to a potential property transaction on my mother's home. She had pulled the trust on file with the county. She had noticed a 2023 amendment. She had a procedural question about the succession language and had found my name listed as a contingent beneficiary. She wanted to know if I was the right person to contact. I read that email 4 times. I called Sandra Okafor back within 90 seconds. She was professional and careful. She clearly sensed that she might have stepped into something complicated. She read me the relevant section of the trust amendment. The language was precise and dry and devastating. Linda Whitfield Morales and Craig Whitfield as sole primary beneficiaries. Renee Whitfield as contingent only. The amendment had been notarized on March 2nd, 2023, 12 days earlier. Filed with the county recorder on March 9th. I asked her if she had a copy of the signature page. She sent it to me while I was still on the phone. I pulled it up on my screen. There was my mother's signature, Gloria R. Whitfield, in blue ink. And even through a scanned PDF, even from a distance of 80 miles, I knew. I knew that signature the way I know my own face. I had watched my mother sign things my entire life. Birthday cards, report cards, permission slips, insurance forms. I knew the particular loop she made on the capital G. I knew the way she always underlined her last name without meaning to. That was not her signature. It was close. Whoever had done it had studied her signature carefully. But the G was wrong. The pressure was wrong. My mother's hands shook slightly, had since the stroke, and there was no tremor in this signature. It was steady and deliberate and practiced. I sat in my office. The afternoon light was coming through the blinds in long stripes across the floor. My coffee was cold. I could hear someone in the hallway laughing at something. And I understood, in that moment, with a clarity that felt almost physical, like a cold hand placed flat against my sternum, that my brother and sister had forged my mother's signature on a legal document. "I want to ask you something," and I genuinely want to know. If you found out today that your own siblings had done this, would you go to them first? Or would you go straight to a lawyer? Because in that moment, I made a decision. And I am still not entirely sure it was the right one. Drop your answer in the comments, because this question stayed with me for months. I did not call Linda. I did not call Craig. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to pick up the phone, to confront them, to demand an explanation, to give them the chance to tell me there had been some kind of mistake. Because part of me still wanted it to be a mistake. Part of me was still reasoning, maybe there is something I do not understand here. Maybe Mom asked them to do this. Maybe she changed her mind and asked them to handle the paperwork, and this is all some bizarre miscommunication. I sat with that for about 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I checked my phone afterward and the call log with Sandra showed the time. And then something shifted in me. Something went very still and very cold. My mother had said she did not know what I was talking about. I had not told her about the trust amendment yet when I called her that evening. Sandra had reached out to me barely 2 hours earlier, but my mother's general disorientation, her softness, her sweetheart, I do not know what you mean. That was not the voice of a woman who had made a deliberate legal decision. That was the voice of a woman who had been kept in the dark. If I called Linda and Craig right now, I would lose the element of surprise. Whatever documents existed, whatever communication trail existed, whatever story they had built, they would have time to coordinate, time to prepare, time to construct an explanation that I would have no way to immediately contradict. I had one advantage right now: they did not know I knew. I closed my email. I opened a new document on my computer. I started writing down everything I could remember. Every phone call with Craig. Every short text from Linda. Every visit. Every date. I wrote down what Sandra Okafor had told me. I wrote down the date the amendment had been filed. I wrote down the date it had been notarized. Then, I did something that I had never done before in my life. I called an attorney. Her name was Margaret Chen. She was a probate and elder law attorney in Phoenix with 19 years of experience. I had Googled her in those 11 minutes while I was deciding what to do, read 8 reviews, and made the call. She had a cancellation the following morning. I took it. That night, I drove to Tucson. I told no one I was coming. I let myself into my mother's house with the key I had always had at 8:47 p.m., and I found her in the living room watching Wheel of Fortune in her rocking chair with a cup of chamomile tea going cold on the side table. She looked up when I walked in, and her whole face changed. That particular kind of softening. The one that only happens when someone you love walks through the door. "Renee," she said. "What are you doing here?" I sat down on the couch across from her. I took her hands. They were warm and dry and slightly papery, the way they had been for years. And I asked her, as gently and as clearly as I could, whether she had been to an attorney's office recently. Whether she had signed any new documents. Whether anyone had asked her to change anything about her trust. She looked at me for a long time. Pat Sajak was doing something cheerful in the background. She said, "Craig took me somewhere a few weeks ago. He said it was a checkup, a financial checkup, he called it. There was a woman there with papers. I did not read them all, sweetheart. Craig said it was just routine. He said everything was already handled. There was the smell of chamomile and something older, the particular smell of that house, wood and cotton, and a faint trace of the roses she grew in the front yard every summer. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, the television murmured, and my mother looked at me with clear, honest eyes and said, 'Was it not routine?' 'No, Mom, it was not.'" Margaret Chen's office was on the 15th floor of a building in downtown Phoenix. It had a window that looked out over the I-10 corridor and a small potted succulent on the windowsill that looked like it had been there since the Bush administration. She was maybe 60, with reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose and a legal pad she filled with notes faster than I could speak. I had printed everything. The email from Sandra Okafor. The scanned trust amendment Sandra had forwarded me. The original 2017 trust document I had on file from a copy my mother had given me years ago. I had printed my call logs. I had printed every text exchange with Linda and Craig going back to October. I put it all in a manila folder, and I walked into that office like I was applying for a job I desperately needed. Margaret Chen looked at the signature page for a long time. She did not say anything dramatic. She did not say, "Oh my goodness." She just looked at it, turned it over, looked at the notary seal, turned it back, and said, "Tell me everything. Start from October and do not leave anything out." We talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I know that because I had metered parking and had to run down and feed the meter twice. The second time I came back upstairs, she had 2 fresh legal pads full of notes and a look on her face that I had begun to recognize. The particular expression of a professional who has seen something ugly before and is now seeing it again. She told me several things in plain language. First, what had been done, if the signature was indeed forged, constituted fraud. Specifically, it potentially constituted elder financial abuse under Arizona Revised Statutes 46456, which carries both civil and criminal penalties. Second, the notary seal was the most important piece of evidence in the entire document. If a notary had certified my mother's signature, that notary had either been deceived or had participated in the fraud. Either way, the notary's records would be the key. Third, we needed my mother evaluated. Immediately. By a licensed neuropsychologist, independent of anyone Linda or Craig might suggest. We needed a formal cognitive capacity assessment on the record. And fourth, and this one she said very quietly, with her glasses off and her eyes on mine, we needed to move carefully. Because if Linda and Craig got wind of what I knew before I had built an evidentiary foundation, there was a real possibility they would attempt to legitimize the document. Take my mother to an actual attorney. Get her to sign something real. And at that point, depending on her cognitive state, it might be significantly harder to challenge. Look, I am going to be honest with you about something. I am a middle school art teacher. I have never been involved in anything legal in my life beyond a parking dispute in 2018. I did not know what an evidentiary foundation was. I did not know what Rs 46456 meant. I did not know how notary records worked or what a capacity assessment involved. I had 48 hours of accumulated terror in my chest in a manila folder, and a woman across from me who was telling me, essentially, that the next 4 to 6 weeks of my life were going to require me to become a different kind of person. So that is what I did. 3 days after my meeting with Margaret Chen, Linda called me. I almost did not answer. I let it ring 4 times, then picked up. She sounded normal, warm even. She asked how I was doing. She mentioned that she had run into someone I went to high school with at the Whole Foods in Oro Valley. She asked if I had tried that new pasta place on Oracle Road. 3 minutes of nothing. And then, so Craig mentioned you stopped by Mom's the other night. Kind of late, he said. I said yes. I said I had been in the area and wanted to check on her. Linda said, "You know, Renee, it would really help if you could let us know when you are coming." Craig is her primary caregiver now. It is a lot of work. And when you show up unexpectedly, it kind of disrupts her routine. I said I understood. She said, also, and I do not want to make a big deal out of this, but Mom was a little unsettled after you left. Craig said she was asking questions about the house, about the trust. We do not want her to be anxious, Renee. The doctors have said that stress is really hard on her cognition right now. I sat with that for a second. The implication was clear and precise. I had upset my mother. I had brought chaos into a carefully managed situation. I was the disruptive element. I was the problem. I said, "Of course. I will coordinate with you going forward." She said, "That is all we are asking. We are all on the same team here." I hung up and I wrote down every word I could remember, time-stamped, in the running document I had started on my laptop. Because Margaret Chen had told me, document everything. Write it down the moment it happens. Every conversation, every implication, every small move they make to reframe the narrative. Here's what I understood in that phone call. Linda and Craig knew I had been to the house. They did not know what my mother had told me. They did not know about Sandra Okafor or Margaret Chen. But they were already repositioning, already casting me as the unstable, meddling sister whose unannounced visits were emotionally harmful to a fragile old woman. It was elegant, actually. I say that without any admiration. It was just clinically, coldly elegant. If they could establish a pattern of me being the source of my mother's anxiety, then any testimony my mother gave about confusion regarding the trust documents could be framed as anxiety I had caused. Any questions she asked could be framed as me planting them. I would not just be removed from the inheritance, I would be repositioned as the reason it needed to happen. I was being managed, the same way you manage a problem. The notary seal on the trust amendment identified the certifying notary as one David Hargrove, commission number 574882A. Pima County, Arizona. Margaret Chen's paralegal, a meticulous woman named Teresa Vo, who clearly ran the actual operation of that office, located David Hargrove within 24 hours. He was not a full-time notary. He was a loan officer at a mortgage brokerage in the foothills area of Tucson who held a notary commission on the side, the way a lot of people in finance do. He had notarized documents for clients as a professional courtesy. Here's the thing about notaries in Arizona that most people do not know. They are required by law to maintain a sequential journal of every notarial act they perform, every document they certify. The date, the time, the type of document, the names of the signatories, and the method used to verify the signer's identity. That journal is a legal record, and under Arizona statute, it can be subpoenaed. Margaret Chen filed for emergency discovery. Given the nature of the claim, alleged elder financial abuse with a pending property transaction that Sandra Okafor's title company had flagged, the judge assigned to the probate case moved quickly. David Hargrove's notary journal was subpoenaed within 11 days of my initial meeting with Margaret. I want you to understand what we were hoping to find. We were hoping that the journal entry for March 2nd, the date on the trust amendment, would show something inconsistent, a discrepancy in the time, a different description of the document type, anything that suggested the notarization had been irregular. What we actually found was significantly more than we had hoped for. David Hargrove's journal entry for March 2nd showed two notarizations, not one. The entry listed a trust amendment consistent with the document on file, but the signatory name recorded in his journal was not Gloria R. Whitfield. It was Linda Whitfield Morales. The identity verification method listed was a driver's license, Linda's driver's license. The document type was listed correctly as a trust amendment, but the signer, as far as David Hargrove's official legal record was concerned, was Linda. Now, there are two possible explanations for this. Either David Hargrove had made a clerical error of spectacular proportions, writing the wrong name in his own official journal for a document he was certifying, or Linda Whitfield Morales had presented herself as the signatory, signed my mother's name to the document in front of the notary, and David Hargrove, whether through negligence, carelessness, or some other arrangement, had notarized it anyway. Either way, the document was fraudulent. Either way, what had been filed with the Pima County Superior Court as a valid trust amendment was not valid. And either way, we now had a paper trail that did not come from me. It did not come from my memory or my account or my interpretation of a scanned signature. It came from the official journal of a state commission notary public. Margaret Chen called me the afternoon she received the subpoenaed records. She was professionally restrained on the phone, but I could hear something underneath it. Not quite excitement, but the particular energy of a person who has just found exactly what they were looking for. She said, "Renee, we need to talk about next steps. I need to pause here for a second, because I know some of you are sitting there thinking, how does something like this even happen? How does a notary certify a signature that is not the right person?" And honestly, That question haunted me too. If you are finding this as unbelievable as I did, you are not alone. Share this with someone who needs to understand how financial elder abuse actually works, because it is almost never the dramatic movie version. It is paperwork. It is procedures. It is the quiet exploitation of trust. While Teresa Vo was tracking down David Hargrove, I had been working the other side of the evidence problem, my mother's cognitive state. Margaret had been very clear. The defense Linda and Craig would almost certainly deploy, once they understood what we had, was that my mother had been competent, had understood and approved the changes, and had either signed the document herself or had authorized someone else to sign on her behalf. That last part, authorize someone else, was actually a legal concept called signature by proxy. And under very specific circumstances in Arizona, it is permissible for a trust document. If they could argue my mother had verbally authorized Linda to sign on her behalf, the picture got complicated. So we needed a formal, independent assessment of my mother's cognitive capacity as it stood in March 2023. Specifically, we needed evidence about her ability to understand, process, and authorize complex legal decisions at that time. Getting that assessment without tipping off Linda and Craig required a particular kind of careful maneuvering. I could not simply take my mother to a neuropsychologist. Craig was living with her and tracking her movements. Any appointment I made would be noticed. What I did instead was this. I called my mother's cardiologist, Dr. Anita Patel, at Banner University, and I had an honest conversation with her nurse about my concerns. I told the nurse that I had reason to believe my mother was being taken to appointments without proper understanding of their purpose, and that I had concerns about her capacity to make legal decisions. The nurse escalated to Dr. Patel. Dr. Patel called me back personally that afternoon. Dr. Patel had been my mother's cardiologist for 6 years. She knew her. She said she had also had some concerns at the last appointment. My mother had seemed confused about her medication schedule in a way that was new, and she had seemed deferential to Craig in a way that had given Dr. Patel pause. She said she would schedule a routine follow-up and incorporate a cognitive screening into the visit. She would make sure I was listed as an approved contact for medical information updates. And she would make sure Craig was not present in the exam room during the cognitive portion of the evaluation. The appointment was scheduled for the following Thursday. I drove to Tucson and parked 2 blocks away from my mother's house at 7 in the morning. I waited until Craig left. He drove her to most appointments, and then I pulled up and told my mother I was coming with her today instead. She was happy. She held my hand the entire drive. Craig called twice while we were in the waiting room. My mother told him she was fine and that I was with her. There was a silence on his end of the phone, my mother told me afterward, that lasted about 4 seconds before he said, "Okay, let me know when you are home." 4 seconds. That was the moment he knew something had changed. Dr. Patel was thorough and she was kind. The cognitive screening took about 40 minutes. My mother answered some questions quickly and clearly. She lost the thread on others. She knew the year. She knew the president. She knew her address and her birth date and the names of her children. But when Dr. Patel asked her to recall a sequence of 5 words after a 10-minute delay, part of a standard memory assessment, she could recall 2 of them. When asked to explain a hypothetical financial scenario and describe what decision she would make, she became visibly uncertain and said she would need someone to help her understand it. Dr. Patel's written assessment, completed and forwarded to Margaret Chen's office 8 days later, noted patient demonstrates mild to moderate cognitive impairment, consistent with early-stage vascular dementia following prior stroke event. Patient may retain capacity for routine daily decisions, but demonstrates significant difficulty processing complex, multi-step legal or financial scenarios without structured support. Independent authorization of complex legal documents without supported decision-making assistance is not recommended. Not recommended. In plain language, my mother could not have understood what she was signing. Even if someone had placed the trust amendment in front of her and told her it was routine, which Craig had, She did not have the cognitive capacity in March 2023 to independently authorize a 41-page amendment to her revocable living trust. We now had three things: a forged signature, a notary journal that contradicted the document on file, and a medical assessment that established my mother lacked capacity to authorize what had allegedly been authorized. I want to stop here and tell you something about my brother Craig that complicates this story. Because I promised myself, when I decided to share this, that I would not make it simple. And Craig is not simple. Craig Whitfield is not a monster. I do not believe that. I have thought about it for a long time, and I genuinely do not believe it. What Craig is, what I think he has always been, is a man who has never fully landed. 2 failed marriages, a string of jobs that never quite became careers. He moved back into my mother's house at 45 years old because his life outside of it had not held together. And somewhere in that humiliation, in that quiet, desperate returning, he had started to believe that the house was his, that his proximity to my mother's decline entitled him to something, that his physical presence, his being there, day after day, while I was 80 miles away, was worth more than an equal share. I understand that logic. I do not excuse it. But I understand it. Linda is a different calculation. Linda is sharp and organized and deliberate. Linda is the one who found the attorney. Linda is the one who researched the process. Linda is the one who, I believe, constructed the architecture of what was done and brought Craig along with her. Craig provided the access and the daily cover. Linda provided the plan. I say this because when the confrontation finally happened, and it did happen, eventually, before the legal proceedings fully began, it was Linda's face I watched, not Craig's. And it was Linda who confirmed everything I believed about how this had been designed. It was a Saturday in late April. I had driven to Tucson for what Linda and Craig believed was a routine visit. Margaret Chen knew I was going. She had advised against any direct confrontation. She preferred everything to happen through formal legal channels, but she also understood that I was going to see my mother, and she could not control what family members said to each other in the course of a visit. I sat with my mother for an hour first. We had tea. She showed me that her tomato seedlings were coming up on the back porch. She was having a good day, clear, warm, herself. We talked about her childhood. She told me about the first dress she ever bought with her own money from a department store in Memphis in 1969. Blue cotton with white buttons. She still remembered it perfectly. Craig came into the kitchen when he heard us talking. He stopped when he saw my face. Here's the thing about guilt. It moves differently than innocence. Innocence is confused and asks questions. Guilt reads the room before it speaks. Craig read the room. He said, "Hey, did not know you were coming today." I said, "I know." My mother excused herself to water her tomatoes. She always seemed to know, with that uncanny radar that aging parents develop when her children needed the room. Craig and I stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then, Linda walked in from the back. She had apparently been in Craig's suite. She had known I was there. She had been waiting. She looked at me with those composed, careful eyes and said, "Renee, is everything okay?" And I said, very quietly, very evenly, "No, Linda, it is not." I told them I knew about the amendment. I told them I knew about the notary. I did not tell them about Dr. Patel's assessment yet. I did not tell them about Margaret Chen. I watched their faces while I talked. Craig went pale. His hands, which had been resting on the counter, gripped the edge of it. He did not speak. Linda did not go pale. Linda went very still. She said, "Mom authorized all of it, Renee." She was very clear about what she wanted. I said, "Then why is her name signed in ink that does not shake?" Linda said, "I think you need to be careful about making accusations you cannot support." And there it was, the line she had probably rehearsed. Calm. Threatening. Designed to make me feel like I was the one doing something wrong. I said, "I am not making accusations. I am asking questions. And I have people helping me find the answers." Something moved across Linda's face then. Not panic. She is too controlled for panic. Something more like a recalibration. A quiet acknowledgement that the situation she had believed was contained had a variable she had not accounted for. She said, "This is going to hurt Mom." I said, "What has already been done to Mom has hurt her. I am trying to fix it." I picked up my bag. I went out to the back porch and hugged my mother for a long time. She smelled like sunscreen and chamomile and the specific warmth of herself. She said, "You are staying for dinner?" I said, "Not tonight, Mom, but I will be back soon. I promise." She held my face in both her hands. Her eyes were clear that afternoon, completely clear. And she said, "I know you are fighting for me. I do not always understand what is happening, but I know that." I got in my car. I drove to the end of the block, and then I sat there for about 8 minutes and cried in a way I had not cried since my father died. Then I called Margaret Chen and told her it was time to move. If you have ever had to be the strong one in a situation that was breaking you apart, if you have ever cried in a parking lot and then picked up the phone and kept going, then you know exactly what that 8 minutes felt like. And if this story is resonating with you, if this feels like something you needed to hear today, consider sharing it. Because families like mine exist everywhere. And not everyone makes it out. Margaret Chen filed a petition to invalidate the Trust Amendment on May 3, 2023. The filing was simultaneous with a motion for a temporary restraining order preventing any transfer, sale, encumbrance, or further modification of the assets in Gloria Whitfield's revocable living trust pending the outcome of the litigation. The judge granted the TRO the same afternoon, which meant the house, the Rincon Heights house, with the mesquite tree and the kitchen window and the canned tomatoes in the pantry, was frozen. Linda and Craig could not touch it, could not sell it, could not refinance it, could not do anything with it until this was resolved. And then the secondary filings happened. Margaret had quietly coordinated with the Pima County Adult Protective Services Office, which had already opened a preliminary inquiry based on Dr. Patel's report. That inquiry triggered a separate review. And that separate review, the one that moved through an entirely different channel than our civil litigation, flagged David Hargrove. David Hargrove, to his credit, or perhaps more accurately in his terror, cooperated fully with investigators. His account of March 2nd was not the account I had expected. He said Linda had come to his office with my mother. He said my mother had been present in the room. He said Linda had explained that her mother had difficulty with fine motor control and had authorized Linda to assist her in signing. He said Linda had guided my mother's hand through the signature. He said he had asked my mother directly whether she understood and consented to the document. He said she had nodded. A nod. He had notarized a 41-page trust amendment, restructuring a woman's entire estate on the basis of a nod. A woman with early-stage vascular dementia. A woman who, when shown the same document 4 weeks later in Dr. Patel's office, could not explain what a trust amendment was or why someone would need one. David Hargrove's notary commission was suspended within 60 days of his cooperation with investigators. That is a separate matter and a separate story. But his account, his voluntary, cooperative, detailed account, became the fourth pillar of our case. We no longer had to prove the signature was forged in the traditional sense. We had proof that my mother had been physically guided through signing a document she did not understand by a person with a direct financial interest in its outcome, in front of a notary who accepted a nod as informed consent. That is not a trust amendment. That is not a voluntary revision. That is elder financial abuse. And in Arizona, it is a felony. Linda and Craig retained a defense attorney 11 days after our filing. The attorney sent Margaret Chen a letter suggesting the matter could be resolved through mediation. Margaret called me after she received it. She read it to me over the phone. She then waited a moment and said, "They are scared." I said. Good. Linda and Craig's attorney, a man named Robert Finch, who ran a family law and estate practice out of a glass-fronted office in the foothills, sent a mediation proposal that was, in retrospect, a masterpiece of confident miscalculation. The letter proposed that the matter be resolved privately, without formal court proceedings, through a structured mediation that would result in a revised trust distribution, one that, and I am quoting directly from the letter here, more accurately reflects the current caregiving realities of the Whitfield family and honors the spirit of Gloria Whitfield's expressed wishes. Caregiving realities. Expressed wishes. The language was chosen carefully. It was designed to sound reasonable, to sound like a measured, adult solution from people who simply wanted to handle a family matter with dignity. Margaret Chen read it to me over the phone on a Thursday morning. When she finished, there was a brief silence. Then she said, "They do not know what we have." And she was right. Robert Finch had constructed a mediation strategy around a version of events in which the worst case was a disputed signature and a question of intent. He did not know about David Hargrove's Notary journal. He did not know about Dr. Patel's capacity assessment. He did not know that his clients had, in the process of trying to secure a quiet financial advantage, assembled a four-pillar evidentiary case against themselves that would survive almost any legal challenge. He did not know any of that. Yet, Margaret sent back a reply that declined mediation. In its place, she attached a 12-page evidentiary summary, a document that laid out, in precise and sequential order, exactly what we had found and what it meant under Arizona law. The Notary Journal discrepancy, the cognitive capacity assessment, David Hargrove's cooperating statement to Adult Protective Services, a preliminary handwriting analysis from a forensic document examiner in Scottsdale who had reviewed the signature and identified 17 points of inconsistency with my mother's authenticated signature samples. 17 points. Margaret included a cover letter. It was 4 sentences. The last sentence said, "My client is prepared to proceed to formal litigation, including referral of all findings to the Pima County Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges under Rs. 46-456 and Rs. 13-2311, unless a full and unconditional restoration of the original 2017 trust instrument is executed within 30 days. 30 days. Robert Finch received that letter on a Friday. He called Margaret Chen on the following Monday. She told me afterward that he had sounded like a man who had spent the weekend reading things he wished he had read much earlier. What happened next moved faster than I expected. I want to walk you through it, because the speed of it matters. It tells you something about how quickly a carefully constructed deception can come apart when the people maintaining it realize the foundation is gone. Week 1 after the letter, Robert Finch requested an extension. Margaret granted 7 days. Not 30. Week 2, Finch filed a motion to compel mediation anyway. The judge denied it in 3 days. Week 3, Craig called me directly for the first time since the kitchen confrontation. I almost did not answer. Margaret had advised me not to engage Craig or Linda directly. But something made me pick up. Maybe I needed to hear it. Maybe I needed to know who he was going to be in this moment. Craig said, "Renee, I need you to know that I never wanted it to go this far." I said, "Craig, do not." He said, "She was going to leave the house to Linda anyway. You know that. You were never going to get your share because you were never here. We were making it official." I held the phone. Outside my Phoenix apartment window, a kid was riding a bicycle in slow circles in the parking lot. The afternoon was very ordinary. Extraordinarily ordinary. I said, "You made it official by forging her signature on a legal document while she had early-stage dementia. That is not making something official, Craig. That is a felony." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Linda said we would be fine." And there it was. The thing I had suspected all along confirmed in 5 words. Linda had said they would be fine. Linda had assessed the risk, constructed the plan, managed the execution, and told her younger brother they would be fine. And Craig, lonely, displaced, desperate Craig, had believed her. I said, "Talk to your attorney, Craig." And I hung up. I called Margaret and told her about the call. She noted it. She also told me that Finch had reached out again that morning with a new proposal, not mediation this time, but a direct settlement offer. Linda and Craig would agree to a full restoration of the original 2017 trust instrument, pay my legal fees in full, and sign a formal acknowledgement that the 2023 amendment had been invalid. In exchange, no criminal referral. Margaret asked me what I wanted to do. This is the part of the story that people always want to be simple. They want me to say I pushed for criminal charges, or they want me to say I forgave them and took the settlement. People want a clean answer because clean answers are satisfying. But real life, real family, does not give you clean answers. It gives you a kitchen table and two people you grew up with who did something unforgivable and are sitting across from you in their own wreckage, and you have to decide what justice actually means to you. I thought about my mother, not about the document, not about the house. I thought about her face in Dr. Patel's office when she could only remember 2 of the 5 words. I thought about her in Craig's car, being driven to a financial checkup, holding her purse in her lap, trusting him. I thought about the 41 pages she could not have understood, and the nod that David Hargrove had accepted as consent. I told Margaret, take the settlement, restore the trust, get the fees, and make sure every single piece of evidence we collected is formally entered into the court record, not sealed, not expunged, so that if either of them ever attempts anything like this again, it is there. Margaret said, done. I want to tell you something about Linda Whitfield Morales that I think is important for this story to be complete and honest. Linda never apologized. Not to me. Not in any communication through attorneys. Not in any document. Not even in the coded, lawyerly language of a settlement acknowledgement. The acknowledgement we required stated that the 2023 amendment had been invalid and that the original 2017 instrument was restored. It did not say why it was invalid. It did not assign fault in plain language. It was the minimum necessary to resolve the civil matter without triggering the criminal referral. Linda signed it. She signed it on a Tuesday afternoon in June, in Robert Finch's glass-fronted office, with a pen that probably cost more than my first car. And based on what Margaret Chen told me afterward, based on what Finch had relayed in one of those careful, professional summaries attorneys give you when they are trying to convey something without saying it directly, Linda had been composed, controlled, precise, not remorseful, composed. That distinction matters to me, because remorse would have meant she understood that what she had done was wrong, not strategically wrong, not legally wrong, but morally wrong. Remorse would have meant that somewhere in the architecture of who Linda is, there was a recognition that her mother was a person and not a resource. Composed means she managed the loss the same way she had managed the plan. As a business problem, a calculation that had not gone her way. That is who did this. Not a desperate, unhinged person. Not a villain from a movie. A composed, intelligent, organized woman who looked at her aging mother's estate and made a rational decision, in the coldest meaning of that word, to take more than she was given. And who, when it failed, signed the minimum paperwork and moved on. Craig moved out of my mother's house in July. He did not announce it. He packed in stages over about 3 weeks, my mother told me, left his old bedroom furniture, because it had been there since high school, and he said he did not want it anymore. Took his tools from the garage, left a note on the kitchen table that said, "I am sorry, Mom, for everything. I love you." My mother kept that note. It is in the shoebox under her bed, with the birthday cards. She has not seen Craig since. People ask me sometimes, when I have shared pieces of this story with friends, with colleagues, with anyone who has asked, people ask me, "Did you win?" And I never know quite how to answer that. The trust was restored. That is a fact. My mother's estate is intact. The Rincon Heights house with the mesquite tree and the kitchen window and the mountain view, it is still hers, exactly as she intended it to be distributed equally among her children when she passes. My legal fees were paid. The evidentiary record is preserved. David Hargrove lost his notary commission. The Adult Protective Services case remains open. By every measurable legal metric, we won. But here is what victory actually looks like. It looks like driving to Tucson every 2 to 3 weeks because my mother no longer has a live-in caregiver, and I am now coordinating her care from 80 miles away while managing a full-time job. It looks like hiring a professional care manager, a woman named Joyce Adeyemi who is warm and patient and costs money I budget carefully, to check on my mother 3 times a week. It looks like sitting at my mother's kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, helping her sort her medications into the weekly pill containers while she tells me about a dream she had, and understanding that the window of time I have with her in this particular way, cognitively present, emotionally connected, still herself, is not unlimited. It looks like the fact that I have not had a real conversation with my sister Linda since June of last year. Not because I am unwilling. Because she has not reached out. Because in the aftermath of everything, Linda has chosen distance over accountability, and I have come to accept, slowly and not without grief, that this may be permanent. I grew up with Linda. We shared a room until I was 9. I know what she looks like when she cries, which is rare. I know she takes her coffee black and reads actual newspapers and is frightened of moths, which she has always been embarrassed about. I know all the small, specific things that make a person, and not just a name in a legal document. And I have to hold all of that alongside what she did. The knowledge of who she is and the knowledge of what she chose. Both things are true. They do not cancel each other out. They just sit there, side by side, the way complicated things do in real families. That is the scar. That is the part that did not get restored when the trust got restored. You cannot notarize your way back from certain things. I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. Not in the comments, in yourself. First, if it had been your sibling. If it had been someone you shared a childhood with, someone whose face you know as well as your own. Would you have done what I did? Or would you have found a way to make it smaller? To call it a misunderstanding, to preserve the family at the cost of the truth? There is no wrong answer, there is only the honest one, and I would genuinely love to know yours, down in the comments, because I have asked myself that question more times than I can count. Here is the moral question that I still carry. My mother loves Linda. She loves Craig. She loves them despite everything. Or maybe she loves them with everything, because she does not fully understand the scope of what they attempted. Some days, she asks about Craig. She asks if he is okay. She worries that he is lonely. And I have to decide every time how much to tell her, how much she can hold, how much it would serve her at 73 with early-stage dementia to understand the complete architecture of what her children did. I have not told her everything. I have told her enough that she understands the trust is safe and that I am protecting it. I have told her that there was a legal issue that has been resolved. I have not sat across from her at her kitchen table and said, Linda and Craig tried to steal your house by forging your signature while you were not fully able to understand what was happening. I do not know if that is protecting her or protecting myself. Here is what I do know. Every time I visit, every Sunday, every long weekend, every Tuesday evening when I drive down after work just to have dinner and help with the medications, my mother says some version of the same thing. She says, "You are here." Not as an observation, as a relief. Just, you are here. And maybe that is the only resolution that matters. Not the legal one. Not the evidentiary one. Not the settlement, or the notary's lost commission, or the preserved court record. Maybe what matters most is that the person who needed someone in her corner had someone in her corner. That the house is still hers. That the mesquite tree is still in the backyard. That the tomato seedlings are coming up on the back porch again this spring. That she still holds my face in both her hands sometimes when I leave, the way she has done my whole life. I am not going to tell you that what Linda and Craig did came from nowhere. I have thought about this long enough to know that it came from somewhere real, from Craig's particular shame and desperation, from Linda's particular need to win, from a family that never quite learned to say the hard things out loud until they became legal matters. I am not going to tell you they are monsters. They are not. They are people who made a calculated decision to exploit someone they loved, convinced themselves it was justified, and got caught. That is a human story. An ugly one, but a human one. And I am not going to tell you I feel nothing toward them anymore. That would be the most dishonest thing I have said in this entire story. What I feel is something more like grief. The particular grief of understanding that the family you thought you had was always partly a story you were telling yourself. And now you are standing in the place where the story ended, and you have to decide what you build in its place. What I have built so far is this: Sunday dinners, weekly pill containers, a care manager named Joyce who sends me voice messages when my mother has a particularly good day, a legal record that protects what my mother built, and a relationship with my mother that is, in its way, the most honest it has ever been. Because the pretense is gone. The performance of family harmony is gone. What is left is just the two of us, at a kitchen table in a house she paid for with 31 years of nursing shifts, with the mountains visible through the window and the smell of coffee and a refrigerator that hums in the quiet. It is enough. It is more than enough. If you are watching this and you have an aging parent or a grandparent or anyone in your life who is moving into that phase of needing more help than they want to ask for, please hear this part. Please let this be the thing you take from this story, if you take nothing else. Cognitive decline is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not come with a diagnosis attached and a clear moment where everything changes. It comes in the repeated questions and the forgotten medications and the days when someone seems completely fine and the days when they seem very far away. It is gradual. It is subtle. And it is, for the people who love that person, deeply, exhaustingly easy to explain away. The people who exploited my mother exploited exactly that. They exploited the gap between what she seemed and what she was actually capable of. They exploited her trust. They exploited the very love she had for them, the love that made her get in Craig's car and go to a financial checkup without asking too many questions, because she trusted him. Because he was her son. Get the legal documents right while your person is fully capable. Make sure more than one family member understands what those documents say. Know who the estate attorney is. Know who the notary is. Know who has access. Not because your family is going to do what mine did, most families do not, but because love, by itself, is not a legal protection. And the people who need protecting the most are often the least equipped to protect themselves. My mother's name is Gloria Renee Whitfield. She is 73 years old. She grew up in Memphis and worked 31 years as a nurse and bought a house in Tucson with a mesquite tree in the backyard and a kitchen window that looks out over the mountains. She canned tomatoes every fall for 30 years and kept every birthday card anyone ever sent her in a shoebox under her bed. She built something, and it is still hers. That is the whole story. Before you go, if this story stayed with you, if it made you think about someone in your own life, I would really appreciate it if you shared it. Not for the numbers. Because stories like this one exist in quiet, and the more people who know what elder financial abuse actually looks like. Not the dramatic movie version, but the paperwork version, the caregiving version, the family version, the harder it is for it to happen in the dark. And if you want to stay for more stories like this one, real ones, complicated ones, the kind that do not have clean endings, then subscribe. I will be here. Take care of the people you love. And make sure the documents are right.